And Plato also had a concept outside of the Jewish Christian tradition of a belief in the afterlife, which was developing that Greek notion that we saw in Homer's Odyssey of afterlife, which was kind of neutral or unpleasant. No, Plato developed this Greek tradition, probably drawing on earlier sources, but he developed it to have a notion of reward or punishment. So he highlights this in particular in something called the myth of so there's a warrior who is slain in battle, and he's just about to be burnt because the Greeks practiced cremation. And before his body is burnt, he actually comes back to life, and he gives an account of what he saw in the afterlife. And essentially, he saw judges who were sending either people who were bad down to hell and people who were good up to heaven. And after a period of 1,000 years, they respectively came back from either heaven or hell and then went to a meadow where they lived happily for another 1,000 years before being reincarnated and drinking from the river of forgetfulness and then re-entering the world into different bodies. So again, it's a development of the basic idea of there being an afterlife into an idea of an afterlife which is more complex, an afterlife which involves notions of reward for suffering or for good works and punishment for the opposite. So yes, with Plato and the Maccabee stories, the Jewish tradition, we start seeing the idea that what happens in this life is not so much important in on of itself. It's important because of its implications for our life in the next world. Plato linked this more to doing good works, whereas the Jewish tradition linked this more to belief in God. Now, moving on. If we want to maintain a belief in God, being loving and having created a just world, well, that entails that the world that we live in has a meaning as well. So what is the meaning of life? Well, to if life is to have meaning, then the suffering that we endure in this life has to have a meaning as well. So there are two ways in which justice plausibly requires differential conditions to befall the righteous and the wicked in the afterlife. First, those who have unfairly suffered are owed compensation for their loss. Second, those who have been evil deserve punishment for their wrongdoing and vice, and those who have been upright deserve reward for their righteousness and virtue. So, for example, think about that Maccabee mother who watched all of her sons being murdered before finally being tortured and murdered herself. Is there any meaning in life for that woman if there isn't subsequently an afterlife? She did nothing wrong other than being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Is there any justice in the universe? Does the universe have any meaning whatsoever if there is no justice? And surely the only way that she could have found justice is that she was rewarded for her sufferings in the afterlife and that the king who slaughtered her was punished. Well, this isn't a conclusive argument. You might just turn around and say, well, sadly, the world does have no meaning. Too bad. But if you want to maintain a belief in God, then you're going to have to argue that yes, he does reward those who believe in him. And why? Because that reward gives meaning to the sufferings that we endure in this life.